with the news, Will, that Stan Van Gundy is out after 1 year, how bad was that pairing? Like we know Stan can be kind of a cranky guy, and he doesn't love the young people and everything, but how bad was that 1 year?
Yeah, man, I think it was rough on everybody. And I think obviously the COVID protocols played a big part in it. We've heard the complaints all year, just basically from every single team in the league about what they had to go through this year. And I think it was really rough on Stan. And I think it was really rough on just the players as well. And I think there was a real trouble for them to connect, to really get to know Stan. I think Stan had trouble, finding time to really get to know his team. I think he felt like the time crunch with, the lack of practices, the lack of meeting time. I think he would even say he probably spent a little bit too much time focusing on basketball instead of getting to know his team, getting to know front office guys and stuff like that. And I think after a while, when those losses start piling up, the finger pointing starts happening, and everybody starts saying it's that guy's fault. It's that guy's fault. So I think there was a lot of that going on behind the scenes, and I think there was just a lack of connection between him and David Griffin and that Pelicans front office, and there was a lack of connection between him and that Pelicans roster and some of those young guys. And I think ultimately we make fun of the mutually parted ways thing a lot, but I think this is the case where it's actually true, where both sides was like, yeah, I think it's time to go.
Oh, it's actually mutually part. It's not like, I need to go spend time with my family, aka I was fired low key. It's like actually like they're both like, nah, this isn't working out. We should break up, kind of thing. Okay, so obviously there was a bad defensive team. You had guys in and out of the lineup. The whole JJ Redick trade saga happens. Is this maybe this is an unfair question, but is this more on Stan this year? Is it more on Griff? Like, is it on the players? Like, how would you divvy up the blame for this season?
Yeah, I think everybody deserves a little bit of the blame, right? I think, Stan Van Gundy was brought in to be a defensive-minded coach, to hold the two stars of this franchise accountable, and I don't really think he achieved either one of those goals. They were one of the worst defenses in the league for most of the year. For a big stretch, they were the worst defense in the league, which is insane because the Kings are still in this league. Right. And I think, and then there are times where he got through to Zion and Bi. I think obviously he deserves credit for the point Zion revolution. He put the ball in Z's hands and allowed him to become the all-star we saw this year. I think he put Brandon Ingram in a position to be a little bit more efficient in his role, but I don't think he was able to get them to really commit defensively the way, obviously most of the franchise wanted them to. And I think, obviously David Griffin deserves some blame because he didn't exactly put a great roster around those guys. The Eric Bledsoe thing did not work out. And I think, and then they also fall on Z and Bi. Those guys, of course you can bring in guys to help them commit, but they got to look in the mirror and commit themselves to playing defensively. And they didn't do that enough this year. And that trickled down to everybody else, where they were more focused on scoring and putting points on the board instead of getting stops. And that's how you end up where they were by the end of the season.
So obviously when, things are going to be a little sensitive in New Orleans based on how the whole Anthony Davis saga happened, Zion, the people are already trying to get this dude off the Pelicans nationally, right? Like they're already saying, hey, maybe he wants to go to New York. He called it the Mecca. He got super excited talking about Madison Square Garden, all that stuff, right? So how worried would you say, even though I think typically it's safe to say it's safe to assume the Pelicans have control over Zion's career for probably 6 more years at least, right? Because it's rare a guy gets it's never happened. A guy's gotten offered the max off a rookie deal and declined it. So I think at worst you can assume 6 years. So how worried are the Pelicans about Zion, maybe having wandering eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think people were trying to run Z out of New Orleans basically on lottery night when they went, when they got the number 1 pick, right? So I think this is something they're used to at this point. But I think, I wouldn't look that far ahead as far as 6 years down the line, because we always say, hey, none of these guys have ever turned the rookie to max down. And I think that's going to be true until somebody does. And that's not me reporting anything on Zion. I still think we're a long ways away from that, but I do think just saying, assuming he's going to sign the max isn't exactly reading the tea leaves in the correct way at this point from what we're seeing right now. But I do think, man, I tell everybody, Z's not a very complicated guy, and he's made it very clear the number one thing he cares about is winning. He wants to be a part of a winning team. He wants to be a part of a winning franchise that's doing the right things to put him in a position to do that. And I think there's obvious frustrations from him, from his family members, because of the way these last 2 seasons have played out, especially especially this past season. I think there were a lot of high expectations for what they could do in year 2 with him. And they just, they kind of like flopped really bad, especially during the second half of the season. So I think, it would be crazy if he wasn't upset about that. And I think,
right.
I think the big thing for his family and, the big picture is just the way they run things internally, I think is a concern. And just the decisions they've made the past few seasons. Obviously, the Stan Van Gundy thing was a huge debacle, and they just want to see them move in a more, coherent way as far as the decisions they're making. I think anybody that's assuming, Z's gonna demand a trade next season, I think we're not anywhere near close to that. I think he enjoys New Orleans. I think he enjoys his teammates. He wants to win here, but ultimately you can't discount, the effect his family can have in his ear. I mean, we saw it with AD here in New Orleans. It started off with the dad making grumblings, and all of a sudden AD was like, hey, I agree. I want to go hire Rich Paul and get out of here. So I think, family is, of course, important to these guys, especially for somebody like Z. So I think they've got to be able to sell them that they're moving in the right direction. Right. But ultimately, it's going to be Zion's decision. And if he feels like he can win here, then he's going to stick around.
So how worried are they then about the family, right? Like how upset is the family? Is the family just like, man, we'd like this to be a smoother thing? Or are there like real like, hey, we need this change and this change and this changed?
I think there's definitely concern, just because not necessarily how upset they are, but the fact that they're willing to voice those frustrations without hesitation.
Yeah,
I think, anybody around this team, you hear it. I think, there are a couple of times in arenas you can literally hear it. Some of the screaming from the stands. And I think that's concerning that, once you get to that point that you're willing to voice it in such a loud manner that, obviously there's some deep-seated frustration that's led to that point, right? So I think, they've got some work to do to mend those fences and to convince them that things are going in the right way. But I think it's not necessarily a thing where it's like, oh, it's over, it's done with, they're ready to move on. I think they can start getting this thing moving in the right direction. I think, again, there just needs to be work done in the front office to kind of show that, hey, we're not doing stuff like trade for Eric Bledsoe and putting him in the Drew Holiday spot. We're not hiring Stan Van Gundy and firing him 7 months later. I think they need to just start making decisions that make sense. I think there's we put it in the story, there's really a feeling throughout the league that there's a lot of dysfunction with this franchise. And when you're a young superstar like Zion, you just don't want to be a part of that. And I think that's the concern from a lot of his family members.
So then what's the next coaching decision for the Pelicans? Because I've heard that Zion really wants Teresa Weatherspoon to be the pick. Fred Vincent's definitely involved. Do you think they go internally, or do you think that they get someone, a more veteran coach from the outside, to come in and be that, not to disparage Teaspoon or Vincent, but be that like adult in the room from the outside in?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of calls for, an internal choice. I think you mentioned the two. I think a lot of people love Teaspoon. David Griffin threw some water on that during his presser yesterday, saying it was a little immature. I'm not going to say, of course, I'm not going to call him a liar or anything like that, but I think there's still going to be some talks with Teaspoon. I don't necessarily buy that she's out of this quite yet. And I think Fred Vincent's a guy that, everybody with this team loves Fred. He's been here since 2010, obviously has done such great work with B.I. and Lonzo getting their jumpers right. So I think there's going to be a lot of lobbying to get him. But I think David Griffin is going to be really thorough with this search. I think he understands the mistake he made with Stan Van Gundy. And I don't think he necessarily has a template of what he's looking for. I think hiring a veteran coach would be nice, but frankly, I don't think there's really a lot available, right? Unless you're looking in a Terry Stotts, Scotty Brooks direction, and I don't think that's going to be it. So I think most of the other names you're hearing is a I'm Udoka or a Jacques Vaughn or, somebody like that. So I think there's going to be probably going to be a fresh face just because there aren't a lot of options. But I think David Griffin's going to circle back to some of those names he talked to last year. He's going to talk to a few new names. And I think the big thing for them is just finding somebody who can get to B.I. and Zion. I think that was the biggest failure with Stan Van Gundy. He was never really able to speak those guys' language. And I think they needed to find somebody who can talk to those guys and really get through to them and convince them, to do the things that it takes to win at a high level.